Good evening. Welcome to the March 22nd, 2020 Finance and Operations Committee in-person and virtual meetings. Before we call tonight's meeting to order, Dr. McGarry, will you please outline the public's participation procedures, sir?
Yes, Board President Brown. We are providing in-person and virtual participation at board meetings and committee meetings. This evening is a committee meeting where we provide some back and forth and answer questions. If anybody would like to leave a comment, they could also leave a comment. We will provide answers to questions based on specific agenda items tonight after the board directs those questions to the administration. We have two meetings tonight. We have a meeting for the Finance and Operations that will go first, followed by the Education and Pupil Services. Those who are in person have a right to ask comments or questions first prior to those who are participating virtually. Those who are attending in person can come to the microphone, provide their name, their address, and the specific report agenda item they'd like to comment or provide a question to the board. And again, the board will direct those questions to the administrators unless the board members can answer them themselves. Those who are participating virtually can participate one of two ways. They can phone in a comment to 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, provide your name, address, and the specific report that your agenda that you're commenting on. And then you could also send an email to committee meetings at committee meeting questions at upperdarby.sd.org. Again, committee meeting questions at upperdarby.sd.org. Provide your name and address and specifically which agenda item from the report that you'd like to comment or provide a question, and we will certainly do our best to respond to those. I can provide an update later on if you need me to, Board President Brown.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. The meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. Roll call, Board Secretary, Mr. Rogers, please.
Dr. Haig.
Present.
Mr. Desnoyers.
Present.
Mr. Neal.
Present.
Mr. Warsavage.
Present.
Ms. Lamar Murphy.
Present.
Ms. Williams.
Present.
Ms. Mitchell.
Present.
Mr. Fields. Mr. Brown.
Present. Mr. Fields will be here. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. Are there any amendments to offer?
There are no amendments.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying aye opposed and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carries. I will now turn over the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to my co-chair, Mr. Warsavage.
Thank you, President Brown. Mr. Rogers, if you would be so kind, please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening, and you can launch right into agenda item number 1.
Sure. Tonight we have two agenda items, both informational. First up is the ESSER update, ESSER standing for the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. We'll provide an update on the ESSER funding and how the district has spent money and also continues to plan moving forward for the future grants. The second item is a staffing update where Dr. Council will present an update on the district staffing. The presentation will include a review of the national, state, and local impact of the unprecedented shortages of qualified teachers, as well as recruitment and retention strategies to address this challenge. So as I said, the first item here tonight is the update on the ESSER funding. And we'll start off by giving an overview of each of the grants associated with ESSER that have come out over the past few years. And as you see on the left-hand side here, these are the grant names. In the middle, you'll see the period of availability of when you are allowed to spend the funds, and then the award amount. So working top down, SR1 was the first awarded. That's $3.9 million. And it can be spent up through September 30th, 2022. SR2 was 17.1, almost $17.2 million. That goes through September of 23. Then we were issued the ARP, American Rescue Plan, SR3. That goes through September 30th of 2024. That's $34.7 million. And then with the ARP funds came 4 set-aside grants that are much smaller than the main SR3 ARP funds. That's the after-school set-aside program for $386,000, the summer school set-aside for $386,000, learning loss set-aside for $1.9, and the ATSI grants of $193,000, totaling $58,790,917. So we'll go into a little bit more detail here, and up first is the SR1. SR1, again, was from March 13th, 2020 through September 30th of 22. So that correlated with the actual shutdown due to COVID, and goes through September 30th of 2022. The items here, and you'll see in the header of the next few slides, it's here for ESSER1, it says actual expense, because the ESSER funds for ESSER1 have actually already been expended. They were spent during the, or before the end of last school year, June 30th of 2021. We spent in the various areas here that are more of a high level view, but it was curriculum writing and professional development. It was roughly $74,000. Instructional resources to support the virtual instruction was $605,000. PPE, $456,000. And then technology resources, which included computers, Chromebooks, iPads, and various software for $2.6 million. And then we had the wireless hotspots, which included actually purchasing the devices and a few months of the service for $185,000, totaling the full grant amount of $3.9 million. In this area, you'll see when you look at the instruction and the curriculum, the lion's share was actually in technology. The reason for that is when the pandemic hit, the district's main focus was getting to one-to-one to make sure that we could actually provide virtual instruction. And you'll see as we move through the grants, the curriculum writing, professional development side of things is going to go much higher above the $74,000. This was the very beginning of us starting to write our own curriculum for the virtual model. But again, these were actual expenses that have been, audited through the annual audit last year, and we have this grant closed out. Next is SR2. Again, same start time. All of the ESSER funding was, they gave you the opportunity to go back to the date of, the shutdown in COVID, which is interesting compared to when they actually awarded the funds. In certain cases, you actually are practically closing out your fiscal year that was a year following the year COVID hit. COVID hit in the 1920 school year. The real action here on a lot of these grants were the 2021 school year. So this is actually SR2 is budgeted. There are portions built into this budget that have been spent, because beyond just SR1 being spent last school year, we did spend a little bit, roughly $2 million of this in the prior school year. So here, the first items, additional student supports, their aides. This is actually where we have aides in the classroom, specifically at the elementary level, so that if we have a situation where we need to have an adult in a classroom while a teacher may not be able to be there or maybe teaching remotely, it gives us flexibility to be able to go through our various models of instruction. Capital improvements specifically here were HVAC for 4.5, almost 4.6 million. And again, you'll see the increase here that I discussed on the previous page of curriculum writing and professional development jumping up to $1.5 million. Instructional resources to support the virtual instruction, 3.5 almost 3.6, and then technology resources, again, computers, Chromebooks, iPads, and software, 6.6 million, which totals to 17.1, almost $17.2 million. Next is ARP SR3, and this goes through September 30th of 2024. So this has the longest lifespan of all of the grants, but does have to be spent by the end of September of 2024. And this is a little bit, you see obviously a few more areas that we've built in here. This is the biggest grant that we did receive at the district. But first, there is the addition, again, an extension of the additional student supports from the previous SR2 grant. This is to extend those beyond the 23 school year so that we're carrying over from one year to the next. That's 1.5 million. Capital improvements, and this is for instructional spaces, windows, and some additional HVAC. That's 6.7 million. Curriculum writing and professional development, again, almost 1.3 million. We have employee retention efforts, almost 6.7 million. Furniture and equipment of 1.2. Third-party audits of certain internal procedures that we would like to take a look at is roughly 116,000. Mental health supports of 3.58. Some areas for communication, $200,000. Social emotional support supplies, $235,000. Summer programs built in at $2.7 million. Technology resources again, and this is at 9.6. And then transition to elementary assistant principals that will be built into the budget going into next year, $768,000. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, just a quick question. 3 summers?
Yeah, so when you look at the summer program, we built out for 20,
Previous.
it was 21, 22, 23, and 24. When I get to the next slide with the set aside, there's actually a smaller grant for $380,000 that is specific to summer programming.
Okay.
So the first summer was going to be, is this past summer actually, be paid out of that first grant. Pay that out first and then move into the larger grant. The other thing I'll say it now as we move into these slides, the set asides specifically identify different areas, after-school tutoring, summer school, learning loss, and then the ATSI are smaller ones specific to 2 buildings, Charles Kelly and Beverly Hills Middle School. Yes. And then within this grant, the ESSER3, this larger grant of $34 million, you are required to spend a minimum of 20% on learning loss as well, above and beyond just that set aside. That's almost $7 million. It's 6.9 and change. That'll be specific to that learning loss. And again, this is budgeted. ESSER3 and some of the set-asides, they're actually still in the queue to be approved at the state level because, as you imagine, all schools in the state are trying to submit all these grants under the same timeline, and they still only have the same staff they've had before the pandemic, if not less. So everyone's just, kind of patient waiting. Luckily, this does go out the longest to 2024. They prioritize the grants by the spending allowability. So this next slide puts all of the set-asides kind of just on one slide here because, 2 of them are pretty specific. You're not really going to get into much detail here. So the first 2, the set-asides for after-school set-aside in the summer school, so after-school being after-school tutoring, and the summer school that we just discussed, the 4th summer of the previous slide, both are at $386,000, and they're going to be salaries and benefits. It's staffing to run the programs. Then when you get down those 2 on the bottom, you have the set aside, and again, that's Charles Kelly Elementary School and Beverly Hills Middle School. And their programs mirror to some extent. And they're looking at even further after-school tutoring above and beyond the set aside, curriculum supplies to run the program, professional development specific to their schools, social emotional support supplies, and a little bit of technology equipment. The bottom right is the learning loss set aside. And that, again, is more after-school tutoring at $34,000. Instructional support videos, that the plan is for our teachers to actually create videos to help with online instruction at home for the parents, so to help the parents integrate some of the work for their students at home. And our teachers will be creating their own videos that will then be shared with the parents in the future. And again, you have their mental health supports at 1.5, and then professional development at 202,000, totaling the 1.9 for that grant. Now, at this time, does anybody have any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Rogers, and I know it's been a ton of work coordinating all of that, and we really appreciate it. I just wondered, I know everyone who's been following things closely knows that, actually, let me back up and say, when you look at the list of items, some of them are very obviously sort of short-term needs, and then some tie into long-term needs. And I think anyone who's been following closely knows that there is a long-term plan for each of these things. And I'm not asking you to go back into like all of the detail, but could you just say a little bit about things like the funds to stay one-to-one and keep elementary assistant principals and things like that sort of reassure the public that there is a long-term
Sure.
plan. We're aware that those funds run out and there's a plan.
Yeah, so a lot of the money that you see there has gone into technology, and one of the big things is being able to make sure we sustain it. So we didn't decide to take that, the first grant and buy all technology. Now, the lion's share was there because you got to remember, we were nowhere near one-to-one. It gave us the ability to get to one-to-one. From that point out, you build a plan based on when are those devices going to need to be replaced. That's why each year in these grants, you see more technology influxed in, so that when we build that out, and we can smooth out when they need to be replaced in the budget. And then what used to be budgeted to try and get us to, I believe at that time was a 3-to-1 ratio, is still in the budget. It's just being used creatively. so that when we come out of 2024, the 24-25 school year, we'll be able to tailor back and make that a smoother transition. The big thing that's been put out there since the beginning is you don't want to fall off the cliff, is what they called it. So everything we've done, whether it's one time or not, if it's a one-time purchase, that's great because you don't have to worry as much about the sustainability. But anything that is a continued cost, we are already building in on how we can transition that into the budget in the future. There hasn't been a lot of salaries put in to maintain positions. You referenced the assistant principals. If you look at the number, that's actually a very low number in the grand scheme of things. We're adding 11 elementary assistant principals that many in the room would make the argument have been needed for 5 to 10 years. What we decided to do was actually only pay for a portion. Look at how we can adjust the budget so there's only a slight increase. Use ESSER funds to offset that increase in year one. And then, so this upcoming school year, the following school year, cut down the support by a half, right? Shift a little bit more into the general fund. And then in the final year, shift that last piece over so that when you come out in 24-25, the assistant principals are fully budgeted in the general fund with no issue, and that transition actually happens on a gradual pace over the next 3 years. So that's actually a really good specific example you bring up, but we're using that same mentality with all of the other areas. Curriculum, we're building out calendars and maps, and thank you to Ms. Kelly for being able to map out over the years and trying to layer when the renewals come in so that we don't get hit with 7 renewals for different curriculum all in 1 year. We can tier them out over the years.
If I could just add to that, both Ed Marshalack and Christine have put a lot of time into developing those plans. First, I do want to reiterate, and I appreciate your comment, there is somewhat of a concern with this, though. So when you point out, I think it's easy for us to figure out, now that we've got it up and running, a long-term plan with technology. But the other related services in here that are associated with mental health supports, curriculum instruction, and staffing, we have debates in central administration about hiring people, because the bottom line here in the school district is we're at our best when we can have the most qualified, highly trained people working with children. The problem is, Craig did a great job, in 2024, $58 million is gone, that we've been living with $58 million in these services. We're talking about additional hallway monitors that we've put in, supports and services in the hallways, that will be gone. Those resources financially are going to be gone, right? The professional development, the curriculum writing, we can figure out ways to work on curriculum writing and professional development, but when you're talking about the additional human resources, the mental health services, the 20 child guidance resource services that Mr. Marshalack and the team brought together and they're starting to work in the elementary schools, they're going to be gone eventually. And so this conversation is one saying to the Commonwealth and to legislators, there needs to be fair funding to keep these up and running. Thankfully, Craig and Ed and Christine and their departments are figuring out creative ways to not have this hit all at one time. But then some of that risk also becomes, as much as the state changes mandates and requirements, you could have some curriculum resources that we've purchased, which happened to us early on with an elementary school set of resources, where if they decide to change in mid-flight, come out with new standards or a shift in certain aspects, some of those resources and materials become problematic. So we're being creative about trying to keep up and stay ahead of it. But as far as the technology you pointed out, we are in a good place moving that forward. My bigger concerns are going to be for the staffing and the services related to mental health supports, and making sure that kids have what they need all the time in our schools. And our biggest conversation is how and where is that going to come from when we have these great resources and supports in the school district and we rely on them, and we're going to start to continue to rely on them in 2024, where do we go when we no longer have those services? That's something that I want to keep driving home to the public during home and school meetings, educating our families and our state legislators and state reps. You need to advocate for fair funding for those significant investments in supports and services for kids.
I thought of this question when I saw the breakout for the ARB SR3 set-asides in terms of after-school and summer programs, but it's probably not the only place it shows up. And my question is, for extra instruction, we're basically using our regular staff, correct? And my real question is, are we supplementing that at all?
We're building a program with our own staff at, the hourly rate that they get set for doing, additional work. And the programs are all built out. We're still running, we have the ESY, the regular summer school, and then also the after school tutoring are the three main programs.
Okay,
And EL,
thank you.
I do want to add to that we've had to, just like everything else over the last year and a half to 2 years, increased our hourly rate because we were not getting teachers to come and support summer school or after school unless we increased the dollar amount for the hourly rate to provide those. The other plug here tonight is we seem to have a high number of elementary school students who participated in the summer school program. We are seeing elementary school and middle school students signing on for our hourly evening virtual tutoring sessions. We've created an hourly virtual tutoring session K to 12, and we're seeing elementary school students and some middle school students taking us up on that. Where we're concerned, those that are out there, and I know it doesn't sound fun and popular, so I'll talk to Jay to the cameras. Middle school and secondary students, please sign up to get support over the summer. We're seeing a drop in students beyond elementary school taking us up on additional supports and services throughout the summer. So that's something we really need to get a push to get parents to be engaged and have and we know it's not exciting, but we could try to make it as exciting as we can. So sign up for the Summer Academy, as Ms. Kelly has changed the terminology.
Any other questions, feedback from board members? All right, seeing none, I believe we are up for agenda item number 2.
Yep. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Council, and he'll provide his staffing update.
Well, good evening, President Brown, Vice President Fields, school directors, Dr. McGarry, community members, everybody that's watching online. Again, I say good evening. President Brown, so much has changed as it relates to staffing since the last time that I sat in this seat and provided the board with comprehensive updates, so much so that during our weekly cabinet meetings, during our weekly cabinet meetings as well as our department meetings, we continue to talk about this paradigm shift, right? This shift that from what was once a rich labor market for educators to really now what is arguably the number one challenge impacting our profession at this point. So if I can this evening, what I want to do is provide the board with national data, take a look, we want to look at the big picture. Then I want to narrow down to state and district data. We want to talk about some of the issues that we found that are currently impacting the teacher shortage. I want to talk a little bit about the cost of teacher turnover. Then I want to talk a little bit about our priorities in the Office of Human Resources, as well as recommendations that we probably need to focus on, moving forward. So throughout this presentation, please feel free to jump in if you have any comments that you want to make. And I apologize that my back is to our school directors at this point, but feel free to jump in. Let's just jump right into the data if we could. All right. So take a look at this slide here. This slide represents higher education, and as we look at it, overall, we can see that degrees have increased. We see a 29% increase in the degrees that are according to this 10-year trajectory right here. However, if you look over to the right, bachelor degrees in education have actually dropped by 19%. As an example, if you look at humanities, social and behavior science, we do see a slight increase. However, it's still an increase. But as you move further to the right, natural sciences and mathematics, and that's just true mathematics, Dr. Haig. That's not mathematics with secondary education. That's mathematics. And computer sciences and engineering, we see an increase by more than 45%. So as this data here is consistent really with what Dr. McGarry and I, that we hear from our local colleges and universities about the struggle to increase the number of undergraduates entering into their programs as a whole. But this is just telling. I mean, we could sit on this slide for a while and just really pull it apart. But a 19% increase amidst all the other degrees or all the other, the increase in the other degrees in different fields. Here's another obviously concerning slide in terms of what we see. Clearly, a decline in enrollment in teacher training programs. 60%, as it shows, 60% decline due to the pandemic. Now, let me just share. If you look at this data, and as we discussed this throughout this evening, this decline took place well before the pandemic, and we'll look at data that we'll see that demonstrates that. But as of 2016, 18% of public school teachers entered the profession via an alternative route to certification. That's interesting because Tracy Hankston, who is the secretary outside of the superintendent's office, she could attest, she's here, she can attest to the number of emergency certificates that we sent to the state, that we provided to the state. 18, in fact, this year. And while that number may seem small, you just think several years ago, it was 1 or 2 certificates that we were sending up to PDE. Now we're looking at 18. So again, this demonstrates the total decline in enrollment in teacher training programs. Let's take a look at take a look at this slide here. Here's a review of the teacher shortage by subject areas: special education, secondary math, secondary science. Again, this data was provided by the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators. I reviewed education program enrollment data in the last slide, but nationally, the most difficult teaching positions to fill are aligned with what we're seeing here in the district. So again, this is a common theme that you'll hear: special education, secondary math, science, speech therapists, psychology, all in line with what we're seeing here in the district, throughout the district. This slide represents the teacher shortage by subject area and grades in 2022. The highlighted areas, we highlighted these areas, they represent certification changes. This is the case here in Pennsylvania as well. We've seen these certification changes. PDE stopped granting the K through 6 certification and the N through 3 certification back in August of 2013. They replaced those certificates with a pre-K through 4. That's the first highlight, and also a 4 through 8 certification. Well, anyone who was a principal know that this is a challenge in of itself. Dr. McGarry knew, or Rhonda Buford, Ms. Buford knew that a third grade teacher, if she ever wanted to move a third grade teacher to 5th grade, because it would just work out better, now you can't do it unless that person has that 5th grade certification. So little changes like this as it relates to certifications it makes for a challenge in the schools as well as it relates to staffing. Now, this is data from the U.S. Department of Education. It shows teacher turnover rates are 50% higher in Title I schools. Again, that's a powerful statement right there. The national data clearly indicates that schools like ours, schools similar to ours, face greater challenges to retain our educators based on factors which include race, concentration of students of color, and salary. Again, the chart on the right, it focuses on specialty areas such as special education, math, computer science, science, foreign language. Again, all these are recognized nationally as hard to fill positions. Again, similar to what we experience here in our district as hard to fill positions. So the impact of the pandemic, it will continue to be researched. In fact, we talk about this as just a dissertation. This will be dissertations for the next 5 to 10 years. But here, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, they are reporting that we lost 65,000 public education workers between September 2021 and October 21. And I just want to sit on that for a minute. 65,000 public education workers lost between September 2021 and October 2021. And, you know, while, you know, I sat in my office the other day with our director, our supervisor of human resources, and we had this conversation. How could it be possible that we lose that many educators in 1 month? And you know what we realized? We realized that these educators never came back after the summer break. They never came back after that pandemic. So again, here we're talking about the pandemic loss, that between September in October, we lost 65,000 public educators during that time. Wow. If you take a look at this slide here, what I want you to understand here, and what I want to pull out here is that hiring teachers, hiring administrators, hiring superintendents, it's not mutually exclusive, right? One impacts the other. If there's a shortage in one area, there's going to be a shortage in another area. Take a look at the survey data that was from the NASSP, the National Association of Secondary School Principals. I don't want to read all the findings. They put out a survey, and these are the findings. These are actually the 4 findings that came out of that survey. I don't want to read all the findings to you, but I do want to point out some very, not disturbing, but unnerving statements in this survey. Finding number 1, mass exodus. Job satisfaction at an ultimate low, working harder and longer hours during COVID, impact of these of tense political environment in response to steps to prevent the spread of COVID-19, heavy workloads, state accountability measures, the time related to compliance requirements, all factors that contributes to the lack of or the decline in the number of people who want to be principals or who's leaving the principalship for those reasons. Now, we talked about the decline in enrollment. The decline in enrollment obviously is going to lead to a decline in the number of instructional certificates that are issued in the state of Pennsylvania. Looking at this slide here, we see that between 2010 and 2011, a little bit more than 17,000 certificates were issued. Those are in-state instructional and out-of-state instructional certificates. Between that time to 2000, fast forward to 2019 and 20, it went from 17,000 to 6,000 certificates issued over that time. That is a 65% decrease in the number of certificates issued. So that drop was not, and I want to mention again, it was not fueled by the pandemic. If you look at the time frame, that's from 2010 to 2019, we've seen this decline well before the pandemic. In fact, 3 years before the pandemic, the state issued about 3 years before, they issued about 7,000 certificates. So the numbers are staggering here. Again, the hardest hit areas are special education, math, science, and foreign language. I just want to give you an example. If we take a look at our math, I like our math teachers for math, for some reason, math 7 through 12. If you take a look at the number of certifications in 2010 compared to 2019, and while in 2011, 837 teaching certificates were issued, in 2021, the number dropped to 206 certificates. So from 837 to 206. If you take a look at our biology, high school biology, 7 through 12 teachers, 2011, 468 certificates issued. 2021, 162 certificates issued nationwide. Family and consumer science, another hard to fill position. In 2011, 142 certificates issued. In 2021, 50 certificates issued statewide. Spanish, I just wanted to give you the numbers on Spanish. Our Spanish 7 through 12, 2011, 181 certificates. In 2021, 86 certificates were issued. So again, staggering numbers. We can see the decline or the decrease in the number of certificates. We can see how that's impacting the labor market, obviously, which directly impacts what we're able to do here. Well, it can impact what we're able to do here in the district. Now, this report is issued to the governor on an annual basis. I did ask for the report broken down by race. They do not break it down by race because I think those numbers will be really telling as well. But we'll keep but what we do see is the steady decrease over the years as it relates to instructional certificates. All right, so similar to teachers, substitutes, and principals, the School Superintendents Association, they're reporting that the greatest exodus that they're witnessing right now, the greatest exodus of leadership at the district level that they've ever seen in this country as it relates to school superintendents. Taking a look at this slide, I want to direct your attention to bullet number 3. 166 superintendent positions changed over the past 2 years in PA. That represents 33% of the districts here in PA. Average stay in PA in the Pennsylvania district is 4.2 years over the past 13 years. And the last one, just a staggering average number of PA superintendents per district in the past 13 years is 3.1. There's an article out there, if you get a chance to read it, it's called The Great Exodus, Superintendents Resign in Droves as Culture Wars Hit Schools in 2021. In that article, they point to such things as controversies that exist around the country, as well as staffing shortages as the reason why our superintendents are leaving their posts. All right, let me come down to actually our data, to this district data. So this slide represents the attrition rates and new hires based on our monthly personnel reports over the past 3 years. Now, this is our story. Let me just share our story. Our story is that we had an average of about 5 to 10% turnover in the past years, years ago. We now see that, except for 2020 and 2021, we have a rate of turnover over 10%. 13%, and this year, what will be over 10% once we get to the end of the school year as well. Out of our office, we're hiring over 100 new hires a year, because compared to 1920 and now at the end of the 21-22 school year. So we're hiring more. Again, the supply has really remained consistent. The demand has remained consistent over 100 in the past 19, 20, 21, and 22 school year, but the supply has declined, has decreased. As you look at this slide, I want you to just look at it from a perspective of our need for substitute teachers. As you can see, there are a number, based on our budgeted positions, 113 of our teachers have utilized family medical leave that can average from, let's say, 1 week to 15 months. We are seeing an increase in the reported absences, as well as an increase in the requests for substitute teachers. Now, similar to many districts, not throughout our county, but also nationally, substitute providers are having a tough time hiring enough substitutes to cover our teacher absences. And we talk about it often. Private businesses, you see signs now, $15, $20, $25 to start. So it's feasibly possible for someone to work at a Wawa or a Starbucks and be paid more than some of our substitutes. So we lose a lot of our substitutes that we had in the past to private businesses at this point. So the low supply of substitutes definitely puts a strain on the administrators as well as the teachers who are in the buildings trying to fill that void. So if I can just take a moment to just definitely say thank you to all of our teachers during this time.
Yeah, Dr. Council, I appreciate, again, on slide 5 early on, it's a national issue. You can go back, the second highest shortage after special education across the country is finding substitute teachers. So it's 67% have reported that they can't find a sub. So when you go to this slide and you look at, that could be just generally speaking, a ballpark number. That means in 1 year, if you take every teacher in this category, and it's not, on average, a child will be without their teacher for almost 13 to 14 days without that classroom teacher. And if we go back and we look at that prior years, I think over the last 2 to 3 years, you're going to see that students were not in front of their regular teacher on a regular basis for a very considerable amount of time. And we were scrambling to keep schools open, and then often doubling up or tripling up classrooms because there were no subs to substitute, to provide coverages.
So as you can see in this slide, we're discussing the impact of the issues impacting the teacher shortage. So there's a number of surveys, a number of reports out there discussing the teacher shortages and the reasons why. And this first survey here, PDK International, conducted a survey, and they pointed to inadequate pay and benefits and student behavior. But what's interesting about this survey is that this survey was the perspective of parents, what parents are telling their children about going into college and being education majors. So they're looking at inadequate pay, student behavior, and sharing that with their children. And another study that looked at the reasons why teachers are leaving the profession, it points out stress, childcare concerns, and working conditions. Here in our district, we asked any teacher who's resigning or retiring for the reason why. Why are they leaving the district? And they point to new opportunities, stress, school climate and culture, and unfunded mandates, more work, more responsibility. For us to truly understand the cost of teacher turnover, we have to take a look at the resources and the personnel time that's required. So the most significant costs that's associated with teacher turnover are separation costs, paying substitutes to cover, removing the operational responsibilities that take place, recruitment and hiring costs, advertising, all the things that we do to have to recruit the new teacher, training costs as well, professional development. The amount of professional development that we're losing is staggering. We make a huge investment of time as well as professional development offerings district-wide, including restorative practices, our trauma-informed care, and equity training. Not to mention that many teachers take advantage of the tuition reimbursement, so there's a huge cost behind that as well. But you can see the national numbers are there, as well as what districts are losing every time a teacher leaves the district, whether it's retiring, resigning from a district. So again, those numbers are staggering. So this is what we know. What we know and understand that our ability to meet the staffing needs of our schools today and tomorrow into the future will be impacted by several factors that we discussed earlier. That's a decrease in education program enrollment, a decrease in the number of teaching certifications, teacher turnover, whether it's resignations or retirement, substitute teachers, a shortage of substitute teachers, and overall what we consider to be hard to fill positions. So our priorities have not changed in the Human Resources Office. It's clearly to fill every open position with the most qualified candidate. In doing so, what we want to continue to focus on, we will focus on, is expanding our online recruiting efforts, working with our communications department, growing our own teachers and administrators, focusing on our Educator Rising program and our professional field experience, making sure that we are investing time and finances into those two programs. We're considering paying undergraduate tuition in exchange for a 10-year commitment. Expanding our use of alternative certification programs and increasing teacher pay to recruit and retain new teachers. Some things that we really need to consider and we need to continue to talk about, whether it's in this format or even at the district level before we bring it to our school board, is our ability to run the same number of electives at the high school. That has to be up for consideration. I don't want to forget the first bullet here under considerations. Craig Rogers spoke to us earlier about ARP and ESSER funds. We have to remember that these funds do not provide long-term stability for our district as it relates to staffing for all the reasons that Dr. McGarry mentioned earlier. Our ability to sustain that after these funds go away. It wouldn't be sustainable. So also, we also have to consider increasing our dual enrollment opportunities and fund dual enrollment for our students. We also need to have further consider adhering to a specific number of credits for graduation. What we do know is at this time we have over 500 students who have met the state requirements for graduation. Again, we have to talk about what that means, the implications for staffing moving forward. So while that ends my the presentation, I do want to mention that this is a complex situation, and it's going to take some real creative thinking as we move forward. I don't want to miss the opportunity as well. I'll probably get killed if I go back and not say thank you to the team in the HR department who continues to demonstrate their dedication through the pandemic, as well as what they do on a constant basis. So thank you so much to them. I'll take any comments or questions at this time.
Not really a question, but just a comment. Thank you for your work. I know this is a complex issue, and I love the fact the way you showed that it's a nationwide problem, not just an Upper Darby problem. But it looks like you understand the issues, and we're going to leave no stone unturned to try to find the candidates that are coming out of college now and looking for jobs. We have to compete with districts that are better funded and able to offer higher starting salaries and things of that nature. So I love the creativity that you talked about as far as paying tuition for a 10-year commitment and things like that. 15 sounds better to me, but 10, I guess 10 will do. So those kind of things I think are creative to try to get the best talent and bring them here, because I think once they're here, they'll see why they need to be here. So
thank you so much for pointing that out. We do believe that the teachers that we need are right here in our district, so we have to provide them with that level of exposure and support them through the high school process as well as the college process and bring them back. We have so many examples of students here who are teachers. We're seeing an increase of amongst our hires of people who attended schools here in our district. So it's a lot of great stories, but you're right, we need to continue to invest in our own students.
I just noticed on the website, I see a lot more recruiting efforts, and so it's kind of the first thing I see when I pull up our website. So just wanted to applaud you for that, and so I like that, and then I like all of the retention efforts that you mentioned on the presentation, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams, and I can't take credit for all of it. It's a big team approach, so I want to make sure that we thank the communications department for the work that they do in terms of advertising our open positions.
Thank you, John, for the presentation. I wanted to ask, if we increase dual enrollments, does that take the pressure, and this is the answer from both of you, does that take the pressure off of us to run the same number of electives in the high school? Do they interact, or no, not at all?
So what Dr. Council alluded to earlier in the, at some point in the presentation, right now, because we run a block schedule at the high school, Upper Darby High School students, for all intents and purposes, actually go to high school for 5 years instead of 4 because it's a block. So in Upper Darby High School, in some traditional 41-minute, 42-minute periods, the most they can get over a 4-year period is 24 to 26 credits. A lot of Upper Darby High School students are getting 32 or more, sometimes 36 credits. A lot of that is coming from, which has been a highlight of the school district for years, a high number of elective opportunities. The problem is, as you review this presentation, the people that are qualified to run those family consumer science, business, technology courses, there's no one coming out certified to teach those electives. So now the risk becomes you ask students to roster or course request classes, and then the school year could open and there's no one available to teach the class. So what some school districts will then do is sit that student in a study hall because they can't fill the class, and they drop the class off the roster because there's no available teacher to provide the instruction in that classroom. The Commonwealth has made it clear in the school code there's 21 credits. I think it's close to 7 electives that a student can get above and beyond the general content. We're well north. Right now, we have passed, over the last several years, a 21 credit pathway. 26 credits are now our graduation requirements. In 2015, I think it was, there was actually reimbursement for dual enrollment. There was an encouraging movement to dual enroll students at your local community colleges to increase the enrollment there and grant funding to reimburse school districts to offset those costs. They dropped the grant funding for dual enrollment. Upper Darby implemented a dual enrollment program in 2008 or 9, I think, when they eliminated, I think it was the first round of cuts in the school district, and they dropped the graduation credits to 26. They were never enforced, and so the dual enrollment became a barrier because kids could not afford the cost to go to dual enrollment or the transportation. So it certainly would remove a barrier from staffing. Now, the other problem I think that will come out of this, I could be wrong, but I think community colleges may struggle also at some point to staff those courses at the next level. So there is going to be a reaction. Unfortunately, as Dr. Counselor did an awesome job putting this together and getting ready for tonight, it's that whole trickle-down issue, right, where certain school districts will feel this heat more so than others. We're one of those school districts, Philadelphia School District, William Penn School District. As you saw the slide that Dr. Counselor provided, 50% turnover in Title I schools and 70% turnover in diverse schools, right? They're being attracted also to wealthier school districts who are paying them a lot more money, and now you're pulling from, instead of 17,000 certificates, 5,000, right? And so where do you go for that pool? How are you going to do it? Inevitably, you're then going to be forced to look at where you can, once again, continue to operate your budget and operate your staffing. This is not a situation where we're cutting for financial reasons. It's a situation where you can't have kids in a building without anywhere to go, without a teacher qualified to be in there. So we're trying to push dual enrollment. And so one of our considerations will be, okay, if we have budgeted for staffing, but we can't hire anybody, we might as well discuss covering the cost of dual enrollment so those kids are getting that education. So one of the things we're going to talk about coming forward creatively is, okay, when you hit 21 credits, if you're going to stay here beyond that, then you've got to go into dual enrollment and you've got to get a certain grade, and we would cover the cost for dual enrollment up to 26 credits, right? So that they're still getting that education, and now they're getting maybe the first year or so of undergrad in a dual enrollment process, and we're now covering that cost because it's coming from a different area in the budget because we simply can't staff those positions. So these are the conversations. This is a lot to digest in this one presentation, but we're having these conversations on top of the school climate and culture concerns. And as Board President Brown asked me, the slide about UDEA, that's just staffing UDEA. That's not including crossing guards, security, transportation, administration. We just pulled out teaching positions. Right. That's not including all the other positions we have to hire and find qualified people just to operate a school district of this size. So dual enrollment would be a help. The problem is there are some barriers that we have to come to understand and get people to get to. I think dual enrollment will be a positive. It started in 2015 with an idea of grant funding to offset some of the costs. Now we've got to look within again and say, okay, if our staffing needs are here, but we can't hire the staff, where can that money go to give those kids that dual enrollment opportunity, knock down the barrier of having to pay for your dual enrollment up to 26 credits, and we'll cover those costs and dual enroll kids. That's the thought process that we're looking at, how we can be creative about this, because at the high school, and I know that this will get out there in a different way, we are not going to be able to, without a long-term national systemic change in the attitude toward public education and teachers, you're not going to find people to staff those jobs. You're not. So where are those kids going to go when they roster those classes? They can't sit in a study hall all day every day, because then you don't have anybody to cover the study hall, right? So there's a big picture that we're trying to give you the first slice of the pie. There are other slices of the pie, but dual enrollment would be a big help. But I worry about community college staffing and the supports and services there too.
So I would like to ask if there is any discussion on the state level about the possibility of figuring out a way to allow credit for foreign degrees. And my question is not, are there changes on the horizon in this area? But, you know, is the possibility of the formation of a committee to study the issue on the horizon? Thank you.
Sure. So I'll get started. You can jump in. But what we know, there has been some legislation that has just recently been passed to allow for certifications outside of Pennsylvania to be accepted here in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has always had the toughest reciprocity laws and rules in place. They were known for it. Pennsylvania and Virginia. Again, they've just relaxed that law to say that if you have passed, let's say a mathematics test in another state, then you can utilize, then that could be used in Pennsylvania. And I believe that's the case for outside the country as well.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
I think it was just last week, former Vice President Ms. Curry, who is on the Education Committee and Group in Harrisburg, was reaching out to me. They had a panel discussion. I was joking around with her back and forth that there doesn't seem to be much representation on the panel for school districts like ours. They had some of the most affluent school district leadership on a panel talking about what their issues could be, like finding one EL teacher or finding one math teacher. You know, those are unrealistic concerns. They are far greater in school districts like Upper Darby, like William Penn. You know, in Delaware County, I think in particular, they're seeing a much more substantial concern than in other parts of the state. So, Neil, Board Member Desnoyers, I think there's a real concern. I think until it hits certain communities again in a substantial way, it's as if I'm not as worried about it. When I ask for these conversations to happen on a grander scale, it's almost, again, it's kind of like the boogeyman is scarier in your mind than actually what it looks like. And so for some, it might not be as big a deal as it is for others right now. I hadn't heard the foreign acceptance of the degrees. I know that the focus in Pennsylvania was providing better reciprocity and encouraging more support for those who want a career change, in which we advocate on every home and school meeting. We're recruiting parents who have a college degree to become teachers here in the school district. We got a couple interested to come in and recruiting that way. But I think there needs to be systemic changes, even on a national level of some kind of funding or loan relief that's waived. In particular, in working in Title I schools, it shouldn't be like filling out these applications. It should be handled by the school districts, and that your undergraduate program is covered federally to work in Title I specific school districts to encourage that to happen. We're trying to have those conversations, but again, until it impacts other communities, and again, no offense, I think that panel was an interesting panel, but there wasn't representation like ours to be on there to talk about how many EL teachers we have. We went from just shy of 1,000 EL students prior to the pandemic to now over 1,600, and I think next year it could get close to 2,000 EL students, just given ramifications around the country and the war in Ukraine and potentially resettling in the United States and then coming here closer to Philadelphia in that area. We can't fill current EL positions, certifications, and there's a specific required training for these. So I'm concerned about what this is going to look like moving forward here in the school district, staffing-wise.
I have to say, since my tenure here as a director on the school board, this is probably the best presentation I've ever seen, so thank you, Dr. Cancel.
Wow.
Wonderful. Yeah, big praise, big praise. Now, you know, staffing is dear to my heart. You know, education, it's sometimes crazy to me that people don't want to get into education. You know, it's a wonderful career. My question regards student teaching. Are we allowed to offer like a stipend for student teaching if a person comes in from a university? Is that legal or is that illegal? I'm just a little curious about that.
Sure. So now what has, again, we look at the legislation to help support teachers, but now, in this case, it's substitutes. Student teachers who have a certain amount of credits are allowed to become substitute teachers under an intern certificate, which has a specific criteria to it in terms of a number of days and number of hours that they're permitted to become substitutes.
Again, though, that's the tip of the iceberg. What if we said, when you matriculate into an undergraduate program, we partner with the university, you get until you're finished you stay on a certain step, but you're paid full teacher salary on a certain step, plus your benefits. And we partner with that university because, let's be honest, for all of us, the training you got in the classroom with the school district is some of your best. What would that do for kids if they were earning that salary and benefits at the same time? And we partner with universities to allow them to get that job, fill it, and then their student teaching was happening as they were actually working on the job, and they were given a mentor, and that stipend was increased, and we're hiring more creatively. It's your second year, you're going to be a teacher, let's get you in the classroom, you've passed your clearances, we'll get you a mentor, we'll get you professional development, you'll stay on a certain step until you've graduated, and then you're ours, but you're getting a full salary. These are the kind of things that need to happen so that those kids, I mean, we paid for our student teaching. We didn't get to when we did student teaching, we didn't get any money. We paid someone to come watch us work. Most industries, they're getting a paid internship in a lot of situations to do it. So why not start early in their second or third year and pay these kids so they don't have this huge loan coming out on top of it? Something that forward thinking that most other industries do.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Thank you. And I was kind of disheartened to see that we had, a little over 18,000 absences reported. And I just want to, as a teacher, there's some days, you see the Dr. McGarry brought up the substitutes was like the second hardest position to fill, besides special education. And so we have teachers in our buildings filling in as substitutes. And so our teachers are being stretched so thin that they need a mental day. A day off just to collect themselves to come back in the next day. Otherwise, they can't be as an effective teacher as they could be. So I'm so disheartened to see that number, and I expect it to grow as the responsibilities of teachers grow and the lack of professionals coming into our industry. So whatever we can do to support our teachers, and maybe schedule modifications and all that, I'd be willing to hear again, because education, it's a fluid industry right now, and I think it's going through an evolution, a process that I think is going to be ever changing for the next few decades until we really get it right, and it's not right now. So yeah, I appreciate all your hard work in this item.
Sure. We could talk about it all night. I'm not surprised by the absences in that over the past couple of years, we've actually required teachers to quarantine, and we've encouraged them that if they were not feeling well to stay home. So we did expect to see those numbers increase over the past several years.
Is it possible to get numbers without the quarantines?
Sure.
To see if there's like a correlation, like is the number growing? Are teachers taking more mental health days than it lasts 5 years, let's say? I'd be curious just to see if there is an increase. I would expect there would be, but I would like to see if the data would support that. Yeah. All right, thank you, Dr. Tinsel.
Just two comments to that. Principals have the same issue, but the problem is here in this district, we've put a lot of our principals can't take off. There's nobody else. So when elementary school principal feels a tremendous amount of pressure, we're stretched so thin, who's going to cover that building for the day? Because there weren't assistant principals. So compliments to this board, we're going to have those supports. But we were scrambling and doing 2 and 3 different jobs. But principals in this school district do not take off most of the time during the school year. And teachers, I think, feel the same pressure. And as you have all these mandates. And that's the thing that this board has to keep its eye on and talk to Representative Zainal and Kearney, and I know Mary Gay Scanlon, conversations have had, and State Representative Curry, who gets it. She pushed back when she was on this board. There are ridiculous things that we're doing. We're asking teachers to do. The amount of data they're collecting, the state and federal out-of-date, out-of-touch responsibilities. We keep on pushing and piling that into a classroom teacher, and they're about to break. Every societal problem then becomes a teacher's issue. And now we're doing all of these things in a 7.5-hour day. They can't do it. A principal can't do it. They were hired to teach and build relationships, and that's not what they're doing every single day. They're spending their entire time on all the wrong things, and it's not fun anymore. Like really, working with kids and being in school, which should be a fun, happy thing, it's not. And you're not getting that reward back because it's creating this antagonistic environment. And the other problem is, you know you've got a broken system. When you bring in an educator, and if I were to, other than you being on a school board, if you walk around and poll your teaching friends, tell me what the PA Future Ready Index is. Explain PVOS to me. Most people can't explain it back to you. So how good is this system if those tools are at play and most people don't even understand them? What is Act 13? What is Act 82? Tell me what ESSA means, ESSE. Well, they can't explain it. It's been so many iterations of trying to make this appropriate. Instead of get your degree, trust your people, let your local community work it out, it's become a broken system for that reason, and people don't want to be involved in that. We need to push back on these ridiculous legislative decisions that are made that people say that don't cost any money, but they do cost a lot of money and time and energy and people and resources to pull off. And that's why people are saying, forget it. I can go work somewhere else. My day ends at a certain time. I'm not dealing with this 24/7 like we are, and they can walk away from it. And we can control some of those things. We got to talk to our state representative legislators about making real substantial change. Schedule changing and school code has to change. We are going to be presenting some creative schedules that are going to push the envelope and maybe make some people feel uncomfortable. But we have to have these conversations, especially for our kids. What the world they're going to walk into is not the model of rows and sitting in the same rows every single day, learning the same exact way as 20 or 30 years ago. It's a much different environment. A lot of businesses are allowing people to work from home. And so how do we figure out a way to navigate this with our kids in our community based on the staffing? It's going to require collective effort and not a shock and awe like, oh my gosh, to scare people. Let's collaboratively talk about this. We're bringing in home and school groups, and we're going to educate our home and schools on advocating and going out door to door too on some of these examples. What does the teacher evaluation system look like? What are we required to do? Why is that a barrier? Who's requiring us to give state tests? Like, some of our families have no idea why we're doing these things. We have to educate our communities who go out and vote.
Thank you. That was a lot. This is all a lot. As an educator, especially in elementary school in Philadelphia, this was really a lot. As I stated before, we lost 190 teachers from January to last couple weeks ago, and it's still growing. The one thing I wanted to ask was, I know there are personal days and there are sick days, but are mental health days available to teachers? Or no, they just have to use their sick days?
We don't consider it mental health days. They have sick day. They utilize their sick time. Yes.
The other comment I wanted to make, and I talked to Superintendent McGarry about this, as far as teacher recruitment. I know another district, I won't say who, is using some creative ways to hire teachers also, and they're going to Puerto Rico. And they're offering them incentives to come over, and they're helping them to get their certification here. So that might be something to consider, because it takes care of it helps with the languages, but it also helps with teacher recruitment, because their teacher pay is much less than what you can make over here.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. We have taken trips to other states as we focus on diversifying our teaching staff. But I will gladly put in for a recruitment trip to Puerto Rico. You'll see that in the next personnel report. Thanks. Okay.
This guy's heard tonight. It's the best presentation ever, and he gets to go to Puerto Rico.
That's not in the budget.
Director
I just
Mitchell?
wanted to say we have an excellent opportunity to communicate these challenges when we go to Harrisburg on the 24th for Advocacy Day. I know that they have a schedule of what they want us to talk about, but we can always bring up whatever we want in those sessions. And I think it says a lot when we get there and we spend some time in Harrisburg, that it was that important for us to get there, to be there. It speaks volumes to legislators.
Any other feedback or concerns from board members? All right, seeing none, I believe we are at the time for public comment. Priority is given to people physically seated in the room. Is there anyone present who would like to make comment? Seeing none, Mrs. Buford, are there any comments online?
There are no comments online.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers, would you mind going over again the agenda items for this evening?
Sure. We had two informational items. Again, it was the ESSER update, where we provided an update on the current spending plans for the ESSER funded projects. The second item was a staffing update, where Dr. Council presented an update on the district staffing and the impacts of the national, state, and local unprecedented shortage of qualified teachers.
Thank you very much, and I pass it back to President Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Warsavage, for running a great meeting. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.